Do you hate problems? Do you hate it when problems come up? We know that problems can be a big source of worry for people. And for people who worry a lot, they tend to think about problems in overly negative ways. It's something we call negative problem orientation, and it's what I'm going to be talking about in today's video. Hi everyone. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the topic of negative problem orientation and how it contributes to excessive and difficult to control worry. But before I get into that, just a couple of disclaimers to go over. I am a registered psychologist in the province of British Columbia, Canada, and this video is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as a replacement or substitute for advice from your doctor or mental health professional. Now, with those two things out of the way, let's talk about negative problem orientation. So where we are in our series on worry management, we started with our basic model of worry, the basic bare bones engine of worry, and we added to it the fuel that drives this worry engine, something called intolerance of uncertainty. In the most recent videos, we've talked about this idea of beliefs about the usefulness of worry and how these beliefs about the usefulness of worry can perpetuate worry itself. So today what we're going to be talking about is specifically type 1 worries. And if you remember from the very first video in this series, I talked about a distinction between type 1 and type 2 worries. Type 1 worries are worries about actual, current, real problems. Type 2 worries are worries about future or potential problems. And so what we're going to be focusing on now is tools and skills specifically to address type 1 worries. So worries about actual problems. So it may not become as much of a surprise that the primary way we deal with type 1 worries is to solve the problem that's contributing to the worry. And so that leads us to a question about, why is it that people who worry a lot tend not to have very effective or tend not to engage in very effective problem solving? So there was some studies that were done that looked at how is it that people who worry a lot, how good are their problem solving skills compared to people who don't worry a lot. And you might be surprised by the findings. And what they found was that there's actually no difference in the problem solving abilities of people who worry a lot versus people who don't worry a lot. But what is different is that people who tend to worry a lot tend not to use the problem solving skills that they have. Whereas people who don't worry a lot tend to be able to use their problem solving skills more frequently and more effectively. So you can think of this kind of like, the way I like to think of it is it's kind of like a garage door, where it doesn't matter if you have the best problem solving skills in the world. You can have the Ferrari of problem solving skills. But if that garage door is down, doesn't matter if you have a Ferrari in the garage or if you have a tricycle in the garage. Neither of those problem solving skills are going to be able to get out of the garage. And so this garage door is something that we refer to as negative problem orientation. It's a tendency to view problems in an overly negative way, seeing problems as threatening, as dangerous, viewing myself as not being very good at solving problems or addressing problems. And so if I don't think I'm very good at solving problems, if I don't think that I should be having problems, if I don't think that problems are good, or that every time I have a problem it means that there's something wrong, I'm not going to be all that motivated to actually want to engage or do something about a problem. And so if I'm not actually engaging in a problem, if I procrastinate or I avoid dealing with a problem, what tends to happen to the problem? Well, typically problems that you don't deal with don't go away by themselves. And they tend to fester and grow and mushroom until they become a crisis. And now it's a crisis that you have to deal with. And so you go into the situation, and now I'm dealing with a crisis situation, and I deal with that crisis situation by spontaneously coming up with the first thing that comes to mind to try and deal with this problem. That is not a very good recipe for effective problem solving. A crisis situation and me spontaneously coming up with a solution right off the top of my head to address this crisis situation. And so what ends up happening is I don't really address the problem very well, and then that reinforces my negative beliefs and my negative views about problems. That problems are bad, I shouldn't have problems, and I'm terrible at dealing with problems. And so as long as I hold those views and I don't engage in problem solving, that's just going to maintain the problems, and it's just going to maintain my worry about those problems. So if we want to improve worry management skills, if we want to worry less about problems, we need to get better at solving problems. And in order to get better at solving problems, we have to be able to use the problem solving skills we have. And in order to use those problem solving skills, we need to address this negative problem orientation. We need to get the garage door to move up, and then to be able to let our problem solving skills out of the garage. So negative problem orientation tends to have sort of three components to it. And the first component of negative problem orientation is this tendency to see problems as abnormal, or that there's something wrong with me that I have problems, that other people don't seem to have the same problems that I do. Related to this is the idea that problems should be solved quickly and easily, and that if I'm not able to solve a problem really quickly, or if I'm not able to solve a problem the first time I try to solve the problem, then that means that there's something wrong. That I should be able to solve a problem quickly and easily, and if I can't, then that just goes to show that there's something wrong with this problem, or there's something wrong with me for having problems like this. So that's one sort of manifestation of this negative problem orientation. Second manifestation of this negative problem orientation is a tendency to focus entirely on the threat components of the problem. So when faced with a problem, all I think about is all the things that could go wrong. So if you think about the possible outcomes of a problem on a continuum, where one end of the continuum is opportunity or challenge, opportunities for things to work out, and the other end of the continuum are, I see it as entirely threatening, 100% threat. Well, what we know is that with people with this negative problem orientation, with people who worry a lot, they tend to gravitate more towards focusing on the threat aspect of a problem. And so if all you think about when you think about solving a problem is all the things that could go wrong and how badly it can turn out, that's not particularly motivating, or it's not particularly good as a motivator to get me to do something about that problem. So I end up in this paralysis zone where all I'm really doing is focusing on the negative potential outcomes, and I'm paralyzed to do anything about it. So what ends up happening is I don't really engage in trying to solve the problem or trying to deal with the problem, because I don't really see many opportunities for things to work out well. And that leads to the third component of negative problem orientation, is that sometimes people can get so good at avoiding problems that they fail to recognize when a problem's actually there. They get so good at being avoidant to problems that they don't recognize that a problem exists until it's too late, until it becomes a crisis, like I talked about before. So if I'm not even aware, if I'm not even recognizing that a problem's there, I'm not going to be able to engage in trying to solve the problem. So I have these three components of negative problem orientation. I see problems as abnormal, that there's something wrong with me for having problems. I focus entirely on the potential threat or danger associated with a problem, and I get so good at avoiding problems that I fail to even recognize when problems exist. If I have those three things going on, I'm not going to be particularly good at actually engaging or doing anything with regards to problem solving. So the question becomes, okay, well, what do I do with this? If I recognize that I have this negative problem orientation, I don't deal well with problems, what do I do? So let's talk about how you challenge each of these components of negative problem orientation. So if you find that you tend to view problems as abnormal, or there's something wrong with me for that I have problems, or problems should be solved quickly and easily. First thing I typically ask my clients is, well, do you know anyone who doesn't have problems? Or is the presence of problems indicative of there's something being wrong? Or is it the case that just everybody has problems and that there's nothing really wrong with the fact that you actually have problems? Because having problems is just a natural state of being. Everybody has problems. So it's really about normalizing the occurrence of problems. Beautiful people in Hollywood have problems. People who are down and out have problems. Rich and powerful politicians have problems. Everybody's got problems. So the fact that you have a problem, or the fact that you have problems, doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with you. It just means that you're like everybody else. We all have problems. And no one ever said that problems should be solved quickly and easily. I sort of think of it as kind of like the sitcom approach to viewing problems, where people hold this attitude that problems should be resolved just like they are on TV sitcoms, where a problem arises in the first 5 minutes of the show, there's then 20 minutes of zany hijinks, and then everything gets wrapped up nicely in the last 5 minutes, problem solved, everyone goes on with their life. While that works really well in TV sitcoms, no one ever said that real world or real life problems are actually like that. So if you're having problems that you find are challenging or difficult to overcome, well, welcome to the club. Everybody has those types of problems, and no one ever said that problems should be solved quickly or easily. So really challenging this component of negative problem orientation is really about normalizing the occurrence of problems and normalizing the fact that some problems are just really difficult to address. The second component of negative problem orientation, this tendency to focus on the threat component of the problem. Well, if you think about our continuum, and I'm stuck in the paralysis zone, where all I'm thinking about is all of the potential threat or danger that is associated with this problem, all of the things that could go wrong with this problem. Well, part of this has to do with intolerance of uncertainty, and we talked about that in a prior video. Intolerance of uncertainty goes very well and hand in hand with this fear of addressing problems, or this viewing problems as threats. Because problems at their core, by definition, are things that we're uncertain about the solution to the problem. If we knew exactly what we needed to do to solve a particular problem, then it wouldn't be a problem. It would just be a series of steps that I need to engage in. What makes it a problem is the uncertainty and the unknown of what it is that I need to do to solve this problem, or how I solve this problem. And so this intolerance of uncertainty can get a person to really focus on all of the potential threat or danger associated with potentially trying to address this problem. So the idea here is to try and reframe the problem as an opportunity and try and get it out of this paralysis zone where all you're focusing on is the potential threat. So it's just a reframe, thinking about the problem in a bit of a different way. You don't have to see the problem as entirely good or it's going to be really wonderful to try and solve this problem. But you just need to get out of this paralysis zone. So you just need to reframe or shift the problem or shift your perception of the problem just a little bit to get out of that paralysis zone so that you can see a little bit of opportunity. And with that little bit of opportunity, now you might be more motivated to actually engage in this problem or in solving the problem. So how exactly do you do this? Well, let's think about an example. Suppose I have a job interview coming up. And one of my things is that I'm terrible at job interviews. I always get really nervous and anxious, hands get sweaty, and my voice tends to quake, and I tend to ramble and all this sort of thing. And I'm really concerned about this job interview, and I see it as a real problem of how I'm going to go about dealing with this job interview. So one way of reframing this as an opportunity is to look at it and say, okay, yeah, I haven't had really good experiences at job interviews in the past, but the opportunity in this is for me to practice the skill of interviewing for a job. So even if I don't get this job, the opportunity here is that I get some practice engaging in a job interview, and in doing so, I'm going to potentially get better so that for my next job interview, I'll have some experiences that I can learn from, and that will help me in the next job interview. So it's not sort of making it entirely Pollyanna, this job interview is going to turn out great, I really love job interviews. That's not realistic thinking. But it's more about just reframing it a little bit to get out of that paralysis zone and to look for even just a little bit of opportunity with this problem. If you're ever struggling to find an opportunity in a problem, a good default is always, this is an opportunity for me to tolerate uncertainty. Like I said, problems by definition are uncertain. And so if you're looking for an opportunity, the opportunity is, this gives me a chance to work on my tolerating uncertainty, which, if you've seen previous videos, you know that's a key to cutting off the worry fuel supply. So to help with this sort of challenging or reframing problems as opportunities, I have a worksheet that I'll link to in the description below. You can download the worksheet, and it sort of walks you through how to take a type 1 worry, a worry about an actual problem, and then to reframe it as an opportunity or a challenge. So the third component of this negative problem orientation, this tendency not to recognize or not to be aware of problems until it's too late. So there's a couple ways of addressing this. The first is these problems, or problems that a person doesn't deal with very well, they tend not to be one and done types of problems. These are problems that tend to come up again and again and again. They tend to recur for a person. So one way of becoming better at recognizing problems early on is to actually keep a list of what are problems that tend to recur for me again and again and again. Because by keeping this list, what it does is it keeps your mind, or it keeps you alert to potential problems that may come up that you wouldn't necessarily recognize unless you were looking for them. So for example, one of my recurring problems is that I'm always terrible at school projects that involve working in groups. And every time that's happened to me in the past, it's been a real mess where I have either difficulty trying to take control of the situation, or I just become incredibly passive in the situation, and it doesn't work out very well. So that's something that I can keep track of. That's a recurring problem that comes up again and again for me. So I just have it on my list of recurring problems, just as a way of keeping it in the forefront of my mind. Another way of being more aware or recognizing problems earlier on is to use your emotion as a bit of a red flag, a bit of a cue to stop and to look around and to ask yourself, is there a problem here that I'm not addressing? So you notice yourself feeling really anxious in a situation. That's a moment to stop and say, okay, I'm feeling really anxious. What's going on here? Is there a problem that I'm not dealing with? Is there a problem that I'm not addressing? I had this, a good example of this with a client a few years ago. And this client found that he was just really, really anxious whenever he was at work. And so we got to this part of the worry management program where we talked about negative problem orientation. And he used his anxiety at work as a cue. And he stopped and asked himself one day, okay, what's going on here? Why am I always so anxious at work? And as obvious as this may sound, as simple as this may sound, what he realized by sort of stopping and asking himself that question was that he hated his job. He hated everything about it. It was going nowhere. It wasn't really that reinforcing for him. He didn't like the people that he was working with. And so once he was able to recognize and identify that the problem was that he hated his job and that's why he was so anxious whenever he was at work, he was then able to engage in some problem solving. So what he did is he worked on his resume and he submitted his resume, he applied for a bunch of jobs, and he got a new job. And lo and behold, he was no longer anxious at work. So it was using his anxiety at work as that red flag of that caused him to stop and ask, is there something that's going on here that's making me anxious, or that I'm worrying about? Is there a problem here that I'm not dealing with? And once he did, he was then able to take some steps and deal with the problem. So those are the manifestations of this negative problem orientation, and those are some tips to try and improve your orientation towards problems. Like I said, this is the garage door, and until you deal with negative problem orientation, as long as you tend to view problems in a really negative way as threats and that you avoid dealing with, you're not going to be able to deal with the problems, and you're probably going to continue worrying about the problems excessively. By addressing this negative problem orientation, by normalizing the occurrence of problems, by reframing problems as opportunity instead of threat, and by recognizing problems earlier on, what you're doing is you're raising that garage door and you're allowing yourself to use your problem solving skills that you already have and to use them in a really effective way. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in the next video. So I hope this was helpful for you. I would love to hear your comments and ideas, so please leave me some comments down below. If you're interested in seeing more of my videos, please hit that subscribe button and that notification bell, and you'll be alerted whenever I post a new video. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video, and I will see you in the next one.